I love opening bottles of aged wine. While there are a few regions that are producing age-worthy wines, there is one region that is really famous for age-worthy dry red wines, and it is Bordeaux. Due to its climate, grape varieties and winemaking, red Bordeaux can surprise tasters and exceed expectations, and great aged Bordeaux is a special experience. That is why I was excited to receive some messages from one of you offering me 3 special wines, all from the 1980 vintage, for a special horizontal tasting here on this channel. One of the wines is the 1980 La Mission Haut-Brion, which is, at least according to their own website, considered to be the 6th Premier Grand Cru of the region. Well, I'd definitely say it's one of the best estates in Bordeaux. The other 2 are definitely of Premier Grand Cru Classé quality because they are rated as such. They are Chateau Margaux from the 1980 vintage and Chateau Lafite Rothschild from the 1980 vintage. According to Wine Searcher, this lineup would actually cost $1,400 if you can locate all 3 of those wines. So let's dive deep into the region, the vintage and the chateaus, and let's open those bottles. This community is pretty amazing and you guys have done a lot for me, but sometimes I'm approached by somebody with a proposition that just sounds too good to be true. On the 11th of January, I received such a proposition when Ian sent me a message on Instagram. He told me how he received some bottles of Bordeaux from the 1980s from one of his clients. Her husband had died and she didn't really know what to do with his perfectly stored wine collection, and he mentioned some big names. And he asked, would you like to taste those wines? And I said, why not? So I received a free box of wine and I still don't really know what to say. So let's have a look at those bottles to see whether they are in good condition and to make sure that they are not fake. You know, you never know. So first of all, I have to say all of those bottles are in pretty good shape. The labels look pretty good. The capsules are clean. There's a little bit of dust and so on and so forth, but they look pretty perfect. The Lafite was still wrapped in this purple Lafite paper that they put around all of the bottles. So on first inspection, they look pretty good. So then you kind of have to look at it in a little bit more detail. The capsule is identical with what you would expect from La Mission Haut-Brion. The label looks correct. There's nothing obviously wrong. There is some, well, it looks a little bit like it was aged. There's actually some issue with the label as it's slightly crooked, which is not necessarily something that would raise alarm bells. I mean, this might be an indication of something, but back then labeling, bottling just wasn't the science it is today. So not everything was perfect back then. So still okay. The levels also look okay. I mean, this La Mission Haut-Brion, the level is basically top of the shoulders. I think the other ones are pretty much at the same level. So they're right at the top of the neck or the bottom of the neck, slightly above the shoulder, which is good. I mean, you want to make sure that the level doesn't sink into the shoulder because then the surface would increase significantly. This kind of enhances or well, the bottle is at risk of oxidizing more quickly when the level drops too far. This actually looks pretty consistent with other 1980s, 1970s wines that I've tasted. So yeah, I'm happy with that. I just want to make sure that the wines are in good nick and that they are the real deal. I'm sure that Ian wouldn't give me fake wine, but he didn't know exactly what the husband of his client did with those bottles. He, however, said that they were purchased directly from Bordeaux and after delivery they were put into the cellar, so they should come directly from the source. I also like that I don't smell anything. Sometimes if a wine is really old, the cork starts leaking and then you might smell some vinegary notes. Sometimes the wine leaks out at the bottom of the capsule or here at the top, and that's definitely a bad sign, but I don't smell anything, so that's good. I'm pretty happy with those bottles. They look pretty perfect, almost too perfect, you might think. But I mean, if you purchase the wine directly from the source and then put it into a really good cellar, it stays in good condition. Usually you don't get any stains on the label if it just sits there on the shelf. And if the cellar is humid enough, you also don't get too much evaporation or shrinkage of the cork. And therefore the level should stay at a decent level. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, to tasting that stuff. But let's first talk about the 1980 vintage. 1980 was a very good year for movies. Star Wars 5, The Empire Strikes Back, The Shining, The Blues Brothers, and Raging Bull were all released in 1980. Weirdly, the Oscar for the best movie released in 1980 went to Ordinary People, which is a movie I've never seen before. It was a bad year for music though, as Led Zeppelin split up, Bob Marley was diagnosed with incurable cancer, and John Lennon was killed. But how was the year for Bordeaux wine? It was not a great year. The Wine Cellar Insider writes about 1980 Bordeaux: avoid these bad over-the-hill wines, which is a pretty definitive statement. Wine Searcher's vintage report is more insightful. They write, the 1980 vintage was poor to average at best for Bordeaux. Spring was cool, which affected flowering, and the summer was unusually cold and wet, leading to some of the grapes developing rot. Early autumn saw some sunshine and warmth, but rain then fell during the harvest, which doesn't sound great. But the thing with bad vintages is that in every bad vintage there are standout producers. Nowadays, the famous chateaus do everything they can to produce great wine, even in bad vintages. But back then, times were a little different. But the 1970s were difficult in Bordeaux, with a tough market and climatic conditions that were less than favorable. This is evidenced by the fact that in 1977, Chateau Margaux was sold by the Ginestez family in a desperate move to save their business. Selling a winery of that caliber would not happen anymore, but in the 1970s it was possible. Things changed in Bordeaux in the 1980s when demand picked up again and they had a string of really great vintages. The 1982 vintage would help establish Robert Parker's reputation and influence in the region. His rating system would make it easier to understand and purchase Bordeaux, which would result in a boom for the best wines of the region. Robert Parker was not too impressed by the 1980 vintage and issued some harsh criticism. In the 1998 edition of his book Bordeaux, signed and slightly smelly, I might add, he wrote that nothing very noteworthy can be said about this mediocre vintage. With the exception of Chateau Margaux and Petrus, virtually every 1980 should have been consumed. And that was in 1998. However, when I look at more recent ratings of some of those wines, it seems like Bob was wrong or the others are wrong. Only one way to find out. Let's open those bottles. So let's start off with the 1980 La Mission Haut-Brion, which is a winery located in the Grave region, and it has a long history linked to its more famous brother, Haut-Brion. In 1983, so post this vintage, it was purchased by Domaine Clarence Dillon, the owners of Haut-Brion, who invested heavily into quality and have refurbished the estate and the vineyards. Grave is called Grave because it has really gravelly soils and it's located south of the city of Bordeaux, and it can produce really elegant, quite complex red wines. And really good white wines as well. So Robert Parker was not happy at all with the wine when he tasted it. He rated it 72 points, which is just a crazy rating for such a highly esteemed chateau. But back then that wasn't extraordinary. I mean, the scope of ratings was much, much bigger. Not every wine received 90 plus points. It was just, some wines just got 72 points. Parker wrote that I had felt this wine would show a bit better than it did in this tasting, but it came across as extremely light with a delicate, restrained, almost watery bouquet, innocuous, medium-bodied flavors and a short, rather diluted finish. It should be drunk up before it fades any further. Anticipated maturity now. Last tasted 189, and well, he gave it a drinking window until 1989, which is not necessarily a long drinking window, but there's a more recent tasting note on royalparker.com, and there the wine is actually rated 89 points, and Johann Castaigne thinks that it should drink between 2023 and 2025. So I'm still in 2025, so hopefully this is still good. So let's open this baby. It's always exciting to open such an old wine, just because, yeah, it just is. The cork looks pretty good here. Look at that. It's clean. Yeah, it looks good. Decent cork. It's kind of low in the bottle, which is a bit weird. But let's try to get it out in one piece, ideally. Coming. Yes! I did it. You know, when it comes to fake wine, one of the most important factors is the cork. Obviously, it's difficult to check the cork before opening the bottle, before purchasing the wine. But in this case, I can see the cross from La Mission Haut-Brion, and I think it also says Mission Haut-Brion on there. I think it definitely does say 1980 on here. I don't know whether you can see it, but I can see it. So should be the real deal. The question though, if the wine is rated 72 points, do you actually want the real deal, or do you want a fake version of it that might actually taste better? I don't know. I want the real deal, actually. Definitely. So as it is a reoccurring question, I'm not going to decant this wine. First of all, I want to make sure that it doesn't fall apart, and in a decanter, old wines sometimes fall apart. So I just want to taste it from the glass. And I might decant it later on if I like the wine, but right now I just want to taste it from the bottle. But now let's taste it. I'm going to pour myself a nice little glass here. All right, I can definitely see how this is considered a lighter Bordeaux style. I mean, the color is pretty light. I mean, I could confuse this with Pinot. It looks pretty light, but it's still ruby. I mean, it's actually really red. Towards the rim it fades towards garnet, but the core is still ruby red, but really light. On the nose, this is really beautiful. I mean, it's definitely not a heavy, hard-hitting Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, it is a Cabernet, but it's really elegant and fragrant. There's like strawberry notes, some pepperiness, a little bit of green bell pepper as well, but also like black pepper and some spice. Johann from Robert Parker actually writes that it's one of the better 1980s Bordeaux he recently tasted. And I agree. I mean, I haven't tasted that many 1980s Bordeaux, but it's actually definitely not dead. I mean, it's not a wine that you should have consumed in 1989. This is still alive. On the palate, it still has grip. It feels quite lean, and here I definitely think it is a bit diluted. I mean, it feels quite light. There's not a lot of intensity to it, but if you like light red wines, this is actually something that you'd really enjoy, especially if you don't like Bordeaux because it's kind of big and concentrated these days. This could be a wine that makes you fall in love with Bordeaux. It actually doesn't say what the alcohol level is on this bottle, which is something that is, well, required by law nowadays, but maybe back then it wasn't yet required by law. So yeah, but I definitely say it's around 12 ABV. So the nose is much better than the palate. On the nose, it's super complex and really interesting. And the fact that it's not super concentrated is actually good, because it just kind of allows the wine to show more lightness and complexity. On the palate, I'm definitely missing something there. It just doesn't have as much power and concentration, and it feels quite lean. But it's a nice one, just not a big and heavy one. So I'm going to rate this 88 points. I'm pretty sure that it's not going to fall apart this year after surviving it 44 years. I think you can still age this until the end of this decade, and maybe it will survive even longer. I can see, however, how you might think this doesn't have legs, but yeah, Bob was just wrong here. No disrespect, but it's just difficult to guess drinking windows, and he didn't get that one right. That's for sure. So let's move on to the next wine, which is the 1980 Chateau Lafite Rothschild, which is an estate that is extremely famous. It's located in the Médoc, in the Pauillac subregion. It is one of the most highly prized wines in the world, and it just can be absolutely delicious. I've been to Lafite a few times, and it's an absolutely amazing place. Their cellars are just beautiful, and below the Chateau, they store many, many bottles of wine. So I've tasted aged wines at the Chateau, and yeah, I can definitely say that Lafite can age. However, Robert Parker rated this wine 83 points, and he wrote, a lightweight, agreeable wine from Lafite, the 1980 has a moderately intense aroma of cassis and fresh tobacco and soft, charming flavors. A success for the vintage, anticipated maturity now. And that was in 87, so, well, he thinks this is gone, like has been dead for a while now. I didn't find any more recent notes for this wine, but Vinous recently rated the second wine of Lafite, which was back then called Moulin de Carrouat, now it's called Carrouat de Lafite, 89 points. So I'm hoping this is actually better than Bob thought back then. What I also find interesting is that he tasted this wine in 87. So did he not go to the en primeur tastings? Did they not take place back then? I don't really remember. But it's kind of weird. Nowadays, those wines are tasted right after the harvest, basically, or right the next year after the harvest, to make sure that everyone knows what to buy and what not to buy. So the capsule looks and feels legit. This is a high quality capsule. Nowadays there probably would be something on there in order to make sure that fraud is kind of more difficult at least. But back then people don't really worry too much about it. I mean, there wasn't really wine fraud in the way it exists today. So they didn't really take into consideration that like 40 years later a guy sitting in a basement will make a video about this wine and wonder whether it's fake or not. But it's not fake. I'm pretty sure it isn't. So the cork is coming out in one piece and it looks pretty good. I mean, it's slightly soft, which is pretty normal for old corks like that. There are no signs of leakage. It is still in one piece. Oh, let's make sure that it stays that way. Yeah. No. Damn it, man! Why do I always mess this up? I should have used my Durand, but I was feeling cocky. All right, I did it. This was the missing piece, and I got it out. So let's taste. In case you wonder, on the cork it actually says Chateau Lafite, and it also says 1980. So this looks like the real deal, but does it taste good? That's the big question here. All right, again, light in color, I mean, not dark at all. And again, not super brown. I mean, if a wine really turns brown, you can be sure that there's some oxidation or that it might have been oxidized, so it's not good anymore. But those two wines so far, they really still have a ruby core, so they are still dark in the center of the glass, and towards the rim they turn garnet. But they both are also pretty light in color. I mean, you wouldn't see many light-colored Cabernets like that nowadays. They tend to be a lot darker and more concentrated. That said, Lafite has a reputation of producing really elegant and fine wines. So it's not completely inconsistent with the current wines coming out of Lafite. I mean, they are darker, but it's not like one of those super concentrated Cabernets. On the nose, there's actually still quite a bit of fruit there. It smells of cassis. There's a little bit of blackberry character. There's also some cherry aroma. There's some spice, a little bit of tobacco leaf, some pepperiness as well. So actually quite complex, and it's more concentrated than the La Mission Haut-Brion. So it definitely shows a little bit more, a little bit more oomph. On the palate, this is also quite a bit more concentrated. There's good weight there. The tannins are really polished, ripe. There's good freshness there as well. So it's not a concentrated, super intense wine, but really enjoyable wine. You know, I can't really understand how the La Mission Haut-Brion received 72 points and this received 83 points. It's quite a big difference between those two ratings, and I actually don't think they are that far apart. And I definitely don't think this is gone. I think this is still there. It's not a wine with a lot more potential, but I mean, after 44 years, what can you expect, especially considering that this was a difficult time in Bordeaux, or still a difficult time in Bordeaux, and the vintage just wasn't great. I mean, I really enjoy this. This is fun, juicy. It's not super heavy and concentrated, but I like this style of red wine. So I really do like it. And it doesn't feel at all like it's old. It feels like, yeah, it feels like it still has a decade to go. I'm going to rate this 90 points. I think it's quite nice. And I think if the first wine didn't prove it, this definitely proves that you just have to experience it, have to educate yourself, taste those wines in order to really know whether something has gone bad or not. And if you want to learn more about wine, may I suggest you checking out cellarclass.com, my e-learning platform where you can broaden your knowledge and your palate. We have 2 great courses on the platform right now, and there's a great community with Cellar Class Plus where you can exchange ideas and tasting notes and attend live stream tastings with me where you can ask me anything. So have a look at cellarclass.com, and now let's move on to the last wine. So this is the 1980 Chateau Margaux, and Parker called it, along with Petrus, unquestionably one of the 2 best wines of the 1980 vintage. It is a beautiful estate and I've been there a few times. They continue to innovate, which is something I really appreciate. But in the 1980s, especially in 1980, they weren't in the best place. This was right after the change of ownership, and there was a lot of work to be done at that point. So Parker rated it 88 points, which is not a great score nowadays, but it apparently was one of the best scores of the vintage. He wrote, "This is a wine of uncommon power, concentration, richness, and beauty. It has a ruby color, fine extract, and a surprisingly long, supple palate. This medium-bodied and still moderately tannic wine should continue to drink well for at least a decade. Anticipated maturity now to 2000. So yeah, we're past 2000 obviously, but I'm guessing that this will also still be very much alive. So Chateau Margaux is located in the Margaux subregion, south from Pauillac and Saint-Julien, and it's just a really beautiful estate. I mean, on the label you can see kind of the look from the gate onto the chateau, and it looks pretty much exactly like that today. So let's try to get this cork out in one piece. I'm still not going to use my Durant. I didn't learn. I never do. This looks nice. I mean, you can see the vintage on the cork. It also says Chateau Margaux on there. Everything looks pristine. There you go. Durant, I just don't need you. Well, I do sometimes. I mean, those corks, they're just really in great condition, which is nice. I'm a little excited now to taste this wine. Parker wrote it up quite a bit. I mean, an 88-point score would not be appreciated today at Chateau Margaux, but back then it apparently was a pretty decent rating. And I hope it's actually that much better than the other ones. So let's find out. So color-wise, it is actually quite a bit more dark. So it's definitely more dark. It's again ruby with a slightly garnet rim, but it's not really browning. It still looks fairly young. Yeah, the nose is very good. I mean, this smells of cassis, plums. There's also some blackberry character coming through. Really aromatic. There's even a little bit of oak notes still coming through, cedar wood. So there is some concentration there, more weight than in the Lafite and the La Mission Haut-Brion. So definitely a more profound and more concentrated nose. Wow. Yeah, there we go. The palate is rich and concentrated. The tannins are fine grained. There are still tannins. There's good freshness. The palate is kind of, yeah, there's just quite a lot of body also on the mid palate. So this is serious wine. The wine continues to develop in the glass. There are some leathery notes, there are some tobacco leaf, really crème de cassis flavor, lots of complexity and intensity. So just freshness still. And I'm just so impressed by the texture. I mean, not heavy, but intense and mouth coating. So definitely something I really enjoy. Really beautiful wine. So I'm going to rate this 94 points, which is a score that Chateau Margaux would be very disappointed with today. I mean, for their more recent bottlings. But I mean, considering this vintage wasn't great, the times were different, they didn't probably have all the expertise and all the winemaking skills needed, but they produced an outstanding wine that is still so alive, so pure, still giving me so much joy 44 or 45 years later. Wow, this was quite a tasting. And first and foremost, I have to say thank you to the man who made all of this possible. Not Robert Parker, but Ian. So thank you, Ian. This is just so generous of you. And I want you all to comment thank you, Ian, down below in order to make sure that he gets the praise he deserves. The wine of the tasting clearly was the Chateau Margaux, but all three wines were really exciting as they allowed me to look back into the year 1980 when Bordeaux was just a different place. The tasting also showed that great estates can make good wine in bad vintages. And I mean, what was considered bad back then is maybe actually something that people appreciate nowadays. So lighter, more fresh, more aromatic Bordeaux is actually something many people look for today. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, what is your bad vintage great wine experience? Let me know down below. Thank you again, Ian, and whatever you do, stay thirsty. Wow, good stuff, man.